The train stops. Metal groans against metal. Through the narrow window, Clara Weiss sees only dust and wire fences stretching toward a horizon she doesn't recognize. Georgia, they said. America. The enemy's land. She steadies herself against the wooden bench, her Luftwaffe auxiliary uniform now wrinkled and stained from days of transport across the Atlantic. Around her, 23 other German women gather their belongings, small bundles containing everything they have left. Some whisper prayers, others stare at nothing. Clara expected brutality. The propaganda had been clear. Americans were degenerates, their soldiers barbaric, their camps designed for humiliation and suffering. She braced herself for violence, for hunger, for the systematic erasure of dignity that war promises to the defeated. The doors slide open. Sunlight floods the car. A sergeant stands at the platform, tall, composed, his uniform impeccable. His name tag reads, Callahan. He doesn't shout. He doesn't raise his weapon. He simply waits as the women descend, one by one, blinking against the brightness of October 1944. "Welcome to Fort Oglethorpe," Sergeant Callahan announces, his voice firm but measured. "You are prisoners of war under the protection of the Geneva Convention. You will be treated with dignity. You will be given work, food and medical care. You will follow rules, break them and there are consequences. Follow them and you will be safe." Clara's legs tremble as she steps onto American soil, not from fear, from exhaustion, from the collapse of everything she thought she knew. She looks around, barracks arranged in neat rows, guards stationed at regular intervals, other prisoners walking freely within designated areas, no chaos, no screaming, no blood. She feels ashamed of her weakness. The guards look healthy, strong, abundant, as if war hasn't touched them at all. She remembers Hamburg before she left. Rations cut to nothing. Buildings reduced to skeletons. Children with hollow eyes. Here, even the grass seems greener. The women are led to a processing building. They receive clean uniforms, assigned bunks, orientation packets printed in German. A medical officer examines them, gently, professionally. Clara waits for the trap, for the moment when kindness turns to cruelty. It doesn't come. In the mess hall that evening, she stares at her tray. Potatoes, vegetables, bread, even a small portion of meat, real food, more than she'd seen in months in Germany. Around her, French and Italian prisoners sit together, talking quietly. No violence, no fear. Clara picks up her fork. Her hands shake. A single thought breaks through the exhaustion, through the disorientation, through the layers of propaganda that had insulated her mind for years. Everything they told us was a lie. That night, lying on a clean mattress in a heated barracks, Clara Weiss closes her eyes and realizes something terrifying. She has no idea who the enemy really is anymore. And if the enemy isn't what she believed, then what was she fighting for? The first crack appears in the foundation of her certainty, and once a crack begins, it only grows wider. Morning arrives with a bell, not a scream. Clara wakes disoriented, expecting chaos. Instead, she finds order. Women rise from their bunks, fold their blankets with military precision, and form lines for breakfast. The routine is strict but predictable. There are no surprises, no sudden violence. She is assigned to the administrative block, translation work and document organization. Her fluency in English, learned before the war, makes her valuable. Sergeant Callahan oversees her section. He arrives each morning at exactly 8, reviews the previous day's work, and distributes new assignments. He is efficient, distant, professional. Their first real exchange happens on her 3rd day. Clara notices an error in a translated medical report, a mistranslation that could cause confusion. She hesitates. Correcting an American officer feels dangerous, even here. But accuracy matters more than fear. "Sergeant," she says quietly, her English careful. "This word here, it should be pneumonia, not influenza." The German term was misread. Callahan stops, looks at the document, looks at her. His expression doesn't change, but he nods once. "Good eye. Fix it. That's all. No punishment for speaking up. No humiliation for pointing out a mistake. just acknowledgement. The days settle into rhythm. Clara translates correspondence, organizes personnel files, maintains meticulous records. Callahan watches her work, not with suspicion, but with something like recognition. He sees her discipline, her attention to detail. She sees his fairness, his consistency. But outside the administrative block, contradictions multiply. Clara observes French prisoners laughing with Italian women over lunch, former enemies sharing cigarettes, trading stories, teaching each other songs. The walls between nations seem to dissolve inside the wire fences of Fort Oglethorpe. Letters from home arrive irregularly. When they do, they carry devastation. Clara reads about Hamburg burning, about food shortages worsening, about her mother rationing bread into pieces too small to sustain life. The contrast grows unbearable. Here abundance, there annihilation. One afternoon a guard approaches too quickly. He's young, broad-shouldered, moving with the casual confidence of someone who has never known hunger. Clara's body reacts before her mind can stop it. She flinches backward, arms rising defensively. The guard stops, confused. Sergeant Callahan appears from nowhere. "Johnson, give her space," he says quietly. The young guard steps back immediately. Callahan turns to Clara. His voice drops as calm and steady. "Nobody here will hurt you. That's not who we are." Clara nods, unable to speak. Her throat closes around words she can't form. The kindness is almost worse than cruelty would be. Cruelty she understands. Cruelty confirms what she was taught. But this quiet decency dismantles everything. That night, she lies awake and thinks about the word Callahan used. We. Not, "I won't hurt you," but we. As if there is a collective identity built on restraint, on principle, on something beyond individual whim. In Germany, she had been taught that strength meant domination, that power required cruelty, that the enemy was subhuman, chaotic, weak. But here, in this camp run by the enemy, she sees something different. Strength without brutality. Order without terror. Power that doesn't need to prove itself through suffering. The second crack widens, and Clara realizes she is standing on ground that is no longer solid. The fracture lines run deeper than Clara imagined, not just within herself, but among the prisoners. One evening in the common area, voices rise in heated German. Greta Hoffmann, a former secretary from Berlin, stands with her arms crossed, defending the Reich with the fervor of someone who has nothing else left to believe in. "We were rebuilding Germany," Greta insists, "creating order from chaos." You think these Americans, with their jazz music and their mongrel culture, could ever understand what we were achieving? Silence falls. Several women look away. Others nod slowly, clinging to familiar certainties. Clara feels the argument pulling at something inside her, a thread she's afraid to follow. "And what did that order cost?" someone whispers. No one answers. Clara excuses herself, walks outside into the cool November air. The guard towers stand dark against the evening sky. She thinks about the word order, how it can mean discipline or tyranny, structure or suffocation. Everything depends on what holds it together. 3 days later, a letter arrives. Clara recognizes her mother's handwriting, but the paper is thinner than before, the ink watered down. She reads about the bombing of Hamburg's harbor district, about buildings collapsing, about neighbors who disappeared overnight, and then, buried in coded language meant to slip past censors, "We haven't heard from Anna in 6 weeks." Anna, her younger sister, 20 years old, working in a munitions factory near Dresden. Clara's hands shake so violently she drops the letter. It flutters to the floor of the administrative office. She stares at it, unable to breathe, unable to think beyond the terrible arithmetic of silence. 6 weeks. In wartime, 6 weeks of silence means only one thing. "Weiss," Sergeant Callahan's voice comes from somewhere far away. Clara tries to respond, but her throat has closed. She hears him move closer, sees him crouch to retrieve the letter. He doesn't read it, just places it carefully on the desk beside her. "Bad news," she nods. Words won't form. She's drowning in a question she's been avoiding for months. What was it all for? The propaganda, the uniforms, the absolute certainty that they were right, that they were strong, that they were building something glorious. Why? The word tears out of her. Why do you treat us well? We lost. We're your enemies. She stops, unable to finish. We helped build the machine that's now devouring itself. Callahan is quiet for a long moment. When he speaks, his voice carries weight beyond its volume. Because power doesn't need cruelty to prove itself. Real strength is control, knowing you could be brutal and choosing not to be. That's what separates soldiers from savages. Clara looks at him, really looks at him for the first time. She sees scars on his hands, exhaustion around his eyes, the careful discipline of someone who carries authority like a burden rather than a prize. But we, Germany, we believed we were strong. You believed in domination, Callahan says quietly. That's not strength. That's fear wearing a uniform. The words hit like a physical blow. Clara feels something fundamental collapse inside her, not just belief in the Reich, but belief in her own judgment. If she was wrong about this, what else was she wrong about? How much destruction did her certainty enable? That night, she dreams of Hamburg burning, but in the dream, she's the one holding the torch. February 1945 brings news that changes everything. The Eastern Front has collapsed. Soviet forces pour into German territory like a flood through shattered dams. In the administrative office, Clara translates intercepted communications, each one documenting retreat, chaos, civilian populations fleeing westward into the unknown. The numbers are staggering. Hundreds of thousands displaced, cities abandoned, the machinery of war turning inward, consuming the very nation it claimed to protect. Clara's hands move mechanically across the documents, but her mind is elsewhere. Every report could contain news of Anna. Every list of casualties could hold her sister's name. The not knowing becomes its own form of torture. She works through lunch, through the afternoon break, through the early evening when other prisoners return to their barracks. Sergeant Callahan notices but says nothing. He understands that some people need work to keep the darkness at bay. The letter arrives on a Thursday. Clara sees her mother's handwriting and knows immediately. Something in the way the address is written, too careful, too controlled, speaks of grief held together by the thinnest thread of composure. She opens it at her desk, reads the first line. The paper falls from her hands. Anna is gone, killed in an air raid on Dresden. February 13th. The firestorm that consumed the city took her sister along with tens of thousands of others. Her mother's words are simple, factual, empty of emotion, because emotion would shatter what little remains. Clara doesn't cry. She can't. Her body simply stops working. She sits frozen, staring at the letter on the floor, unable to process the enormity of absence. Anna laughing at the kitchen table, Anna singing off-key, Anna believing, with the absolute faith of 20 years, that everything would be fine because the Reich was strong and Germany was invincible. Anna dead beneath rubble in a city that burned like hell itself. Weiss? Callahan's voice breaks through. She doesn't respond. Can't. He moves closer, sees the letter, understands without needing explanation. He's seen this before, the moment when loss becomes real, when the abstract horror of war crystallizes into personal devastation. Come on, he says quietly. You need to sit somewhere else. He guides her to a chair in the corner, away from the windows, away from the other workers. She's shaking now, trembling so violently her teeth chatter. He brings water. She can't hold the cup. He sets it aside and simply waits. Minutes pass. Maybe hours. Time loses meaning. Finally, words come. Broken, ragged, barely coherent. She believed. She believed everything they told us. She thought we were winning. She thought, I know. She died believing a lie. Callahan crouches beside the chair so they're at eye level. His face is serious, carved with the kind of understanding that only comes from carrying his own losses. Listen to me, he says. It's not weakness to feel this. Weakness is denying what's right in front of you. You're feeling what you should feel. That's not surrender. That's being human. Clara looks at him, tears finally breaking through. I don't know what I believe anymore. Everything I thought was true, everything, it's all ashes. Then you start over, Callahan says simply. You build something new from what's left. The statement hangs in the air between them, not comfort, not false hope, just the brutal honesty of survival. Spring arrives, but Clara barely notices. The world continues turning while she exists in a fog of grief and questions without answers. But grief, she discovers, cannot sustain itself forever. Eventually, the body insists on living. The mind insists on finding meaning in the wreckage. She returns to work in the administrative office. Sergeant Callahan assigns her tasks that require focus: translation of technical documents, organization of complex filing systems, work that demands attention, that leaves no room for the spiraling thoughts that wait in moments of stillness. They develop a rhythm. He brings assignments. She completes them with meticulous precision. They exchange few words, but the silence between them feels different now, not awkward, but companionable. Two people who understand that some losses cannot be discussed, only acknowledged through presence. One afternoon, Callahan brings a radio into the office. Classical music fills the space. Beethoven, she recognizes, the Pastoral Symphony, music she heard as a child, before everything became about anthems and marches and songs, designed to move masses rather than touch souls. "You like Beethoven?" she asks, surprised. "My mother played piano," he says, adjusting the dial. "Used to play this every Sunday morning. Drove my brother crazy. He wanted jazz." The past tense registers immediately. Wanted. He was killed in France, November 1944. "Same month you arrived here." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She stops working, turns to face him fully. I'm so sorry. I didn't know." Callahan shrugs, but she sees the tightness around his eyes. War doesn't ask permission before it takes. You know that better than most now. "But Clara struggles with the enormity of it. "My country killed your brother, the people I served, the system I believed in." "Stop." His voice is firm, but not harsh. "And you didn't kill my brother. A war did. A war started by men who convinced millions that their neighbors were enemies. You were one of those millions. So was he. We both believed what we were told. How can you not hate me?" Callahan looks at her for a long moment. "Because hate is easy. It's the simplest emotion in the world. Any fool can hate. But looking at another person and seeing their humanity, even when they're supposed to be your enemy, that takes actual strength." The music swells, pastoral and peaceful, a reminder that beauty existed before the war and will exist after it. Clara feels something shift inside her, not healing, not yet, but the first recognition that healing might be possible. They talk more after that, small conversations at first. He mentions growing up in Ohio, working in his father's hardware store, learning that discipline and kindness aren't opposites. She talks about Hamburg before the war, about studying English literature, about wanting to teach before everything changed. They never discuss politics, never debate ideology. Those conversations are pointless now. Instead, they talk about the future. Not Germany's future or America's future, but the future as an abstract concept. The possibility of rebuilding, the question of what comes after destruction. May brings news that Germany has surrendered, unconditional, total, final. The prisoners gather in the common area, listening to the announcement in stunned silence. Some cry, others stare blankly. Greta Hoffmann sits alone in a corner, her face empty of everything except disbelief. Clara feels nothing at first, then slowly something unexpected, relief. It's over. The machine has finally stopped consuming lives, but relief brings its own terror. What now? June 1945. Repatriation lists begin circulating through Fort Oglethorpe. Names called alphabetically, groups organized by region of origin, logistical arrangements made for the return of prisoners to a Germany that no longer exists as they knew it. Clara Weiss appears on the third list, Hamburg Group, departure scheduled for July 2nd. She should feel relief. After 15 months of captivity, she's going home. But home is a word that has lost its meaning. Hamburg is rubble. Anna is gone. The country she left no longer exists, replaced by something broken and occupied, divided among victors who must now decide what to do with the defeated. She's terrified. The administrative office feels different now that her time is counted in days. Callahan maintains his professional distance, but there's a weight to their interactions, an awareness that this temporary arrangement is ending. She finishes organizing files she'll never see again. He assigns tasks with decreasing urgency, both of them understanding the pretense. On her last day, he asks if she wants to walk the perimeter. It's unusual. Guards don't typically socialize with prisoners, but the war is over, and many old rules feel irrelevant now. They walk in silence at first, past the barracks where Clara spent 15 months learning to question everything she once believed. The Georgia summer is thick with humidity, cicadas screaming in the trees beyond the fence. "Are you afraid?" Callahan asks finally. Clara considers lying, then abandons the impulse. "Yes, I don't know what I'm going back to. Everything is destroyed. Everyone I knew is dead, scattered, or changed. I don't even know if I'm the same person who left." "You're not," he says simply. "War changes everyone. The question is what you do with that change." They reach the northern edge of the compound. In the distance, civilian life continues, cars on roads, people in towns, a world that kept turning while they existed in this strange suspended space between conflict and peace. "Rebuilding is harder than destroying," Callahan says, his voice quiet but certain. "Anyone can tear something down. It takes real courage to build again. But someone has to start. Someone has to decide that what comes next matters more than what came before." Clara stops walking, looks at him directly. "I don't know if I deserve to be part of that rebuilding. After everything Germany did, after what I supported, even passively." "The question isn't about deserving," Callahan responds, meeting her gaze. "It's about choosing to do the right thing from this point forward. You can't undo the past. Nobody can. But you can refuse to let it define your future." They stand there as the sun begins to set, two people shaped by the same war from opposite sides, understanding each other in ways that transcend language or nationality. "Thank you," Clara says finally, "for treating me like a human being when you had every reason not to." Callahan extends his hand. She takes it. The handshake lasts longer than necessary, carrying the weight of everything unsaid. Grief shared, lessons learned, the recognition that humanity persists even in the spaces between enemies. "Good luck, Weiss," he says. "Build something worth keeping this time." The next morning, Clara boards a truck heading east. She doesn't look back. 7 years after the surrender. Clara Weiss stands in a modest office in Hamburg's Altona district, reviewing case files for displaced families. The building survived the bombing, one of the few that did, and now houses a social services organization helping women and children navigate the chaos of post-war reconstruction. Germany is unrecognizable, divided now between East and West, occupied and rebuilt according to competing visions of what the future should be. Hamburg belongs to the West, to the British zone gradually transitioning toward independence. The rubble has been cleared. New buildings rise where old ones fell. Life continues, though scarred. Clara has found her place in this new world. She works with refugees, with widows, with children who lost parents and parents who lost children. She helps them navigate bureaucracy, find housing, access resources. She listens without judgment. She offers support without pity. She applies everything she learned in Fort Oglethorpe, that dignity matters, that small kindnesses accumulate into something larger, that treating people with respect costs nothing but changes everything. The work is exhausting. The need is endless. But it feels right in a way nothing felt right during the war. A letter arrives on a Tuesday afternoon. American postage, return address in Ohio. Her hands shake slightly as she opens it. The handwriting is familiar, precise, controlled, exactly like Sergeant Callahan's morning reports used to be. Inside, a brief note and 3 photographs. The note is simple. "Miss Weiss, I hope this letter finds you well. I'm back home now, working at my father's hardware store and trying to remember what normal life feels like. I'm married. Her name is Ellen. We have a daughter. I've enclosed some pictures. I wanted you to know that some of us made it through and are building the lives we talked about. I hope you're doing the same. Thomas Callahan." Clara studies the photographs. Callahan in civilian clothes, smiling beside a woman with kind eyes, a baby in his arms, maybe 6 months old. The third photo shows the hardware store. Neat and ordinary and beautifully mundane. She sits down and writes back immediately. Her English is better now, refined through years of translating documents and helping refugees communicate with occupation authorities. Dear Mr. Callahan, your letter was the first genuinely good news I've received in longer than I can remember. Congratulations on your family, they're beautiful. I'm working with displaced persons here in Hamburg, trying to help rebuild what was destroyed. It's hard work, but you taught me something important, that compassion isn't weakness, that treating people with dignity is the foundation everything else must be built on. You gave me that first act of humanity when I needed it most, and it opened every door that followed. Thank you for that, for everything. I hope your daughter grows up in a world where we've learned from our mistakes. Clara Weiss. She seals the envelope and places it in her desk drawer alongside other precious items. Her first letter from her mother after returning home, a small notebook issued to her at Fort Oglethorpe, a photograph of the women's barracks taken just before repatriation. These objects tell a story she rarely speaks aloud, but carries with her constantly. A story about destruction and reconstruction, about propaganda dissolving in the face of reality, about enemies becoming teachers, about the small human connections that survive when everything else collapses. Clara stands, straightens her desk, and prepares for her next appointment. Outside, Hamburg rebuilds itself one brick at a time. Inside, Clara does the same. One person, one conversation, one small act of compassion at a time. The war destroyed countries, but compassion saved people, and people can rebuild the world.